Make It Right, the manufacturing podcast.
Welcome to the Make It Right podcast. I'm Janet Eastman, and this is episode 52, which means we've hit our first anniversary. So cue the balloons, the champagne, and the fireworks. In the spring of 2018, Kevin Snook and I launched this podcast to discuss his newly published book, Make It Right, 5 Steps to Align Your Manufacturing Business from the Front Line to the Bottom Line. Initially, we were going to just do the book podcast over 10 weeks, but we discovered that there were a lot of things to talk about and a world of interesting people willing to share their insights and experience. So here we are, 1 year on, and thank you for being on the journey with us. This week on the Make It Right podcast, we bring you highlights of those initial podcasts that touched on the idea that got this whole thing rolling, the importance of people in any organization, and how leaders need to support and encourage them so we can all get the best out of our work and our lives. Leadership isn't easy, and the manufacturing leader has unique challenges, and this is how Kevin described them.
For many manufacturing CEOs, they find the work really difficult, and it's just a matter of, it's one thing after another. It's one, perhaps a crisis after another, perhaps a situation after another. Many CEOs tell me that they are, that something's going wrong when you're being constantly dragged into meetings that you don't feel you ought to be in. And that idea of always being on the treadmill, always having another crisis, another situation come up, that's a very, unfortunately, it's a very normal situation in manufacturing. And what I see with the CEOs who have their process well aligned, they have their organization well aligned, and they're really managing to engage people in the right way, is that they don't seem busy. They seem fully engaged themselves. And so it doesn't mean that they have, that they're not doing anything during the day. It just means that the things that they're doing are really focused on the priorities, and they're delivering results, they're delivering growth. Any manufacturing CEO, any CEO of any company ought to be focusing on the growth of the business and the strategic moves in order to be able to increase that growth. And that's what we do with the Align process. We pull people out of busy and out of constant noise into a flow of having at least 50% of their time focused on growing the business.
So in this chapter, you point out something very simple that I don't think most of us recognize, in that it's when you're managing the team and the machine dynamic, it's the people who are the most complicated. I think most people look at those big machines and they go, oh my goodness, those things are the complications. But it's not really. So how do you bridge that people gap between the C-suite and the team on the front line so that the business can run smoothly and the CEO isn't running around with his hair on fire?
Yeah. Well, I think the machines have variability, of course, and they have a natural variability, and they have a natural life, and each component on the machine has a natural lifespan, and that's predictable. If we look after the machines well, then that part is predictable. It's the same with the materials. Every material that you bring into a manufacturing facility is going to have some kind of variability to it, and they do add complexity to the business, but it's manageable. The area that is more of a challenge is people, because you never know what thoughts people wake up with in their heads that morning. People are very different from day to day, depending on what's happened to them in their home situation, in their regular life situation, depending on what their interaction was with their colleagues or their boss. And so there's always this unknown level of variability in people. And the key for us is, how do we manage to reduce that and engage people in the right areas that are really going to help the business. So this is the part that there's definitely more complexity within people, but there's also a lot more potential within people than many of us are using.
Harnessing people's potential came to light for Kevin early in his career as a young manager, and it was an aha moment that set him on the path to the Align process.
One particular time I was working for a major company, and the results just weren't coming. And we were going to all the meetings, we were doing all as I said, all the things we thought we were supposed to do. And the results were a big challenge. I then had a meeting from a regional director who'd come to talk to me, he realized, he basically said to me that my results were terrible. And that was a huge shock as a young manager. And he was right. The results weren't meeting the standards they were supposed to be. But the challenge was really, it wasn't as me as an individual or the people that were working on my production line. And I felt terrible for my teams that were working and were trying extremely hard every day. You know, in manufacturing, the people are working. Quite often they've got a 1 or 2 hour trip to work, especially in Asia where I've been spending a lot of my time. A long trip to work and then a long day at work in environments that are noisy and challenging. And then, you know, and are trying really hard. And then to not get the results that they want to be getting is very disappointing for them as individuals. And then to be told that the results are bad by the leadership team is, that wasn't a nice feeling. I got to a point where I was working so hard that I basically ended up with very close to a breakdown. And I had an epiphany point, and that was I have two choices. I can either quit and go and find something else to do, or I can turn this around and do things the way that I think they should be done rather than just the way I'm being told for them to be done. And the way I wanted them to be done was that I was getting everybody involved in that, highly engaged in what we were producing. And that was the big change, really. I called in my team leaders, I called in all the team members and said, look, how are we going to do this differently? How are we going to make sure that we who know the equipment better than any of the other leaders around can actually run this equipment the way we want to run it, in the way that's going to protect the consumer and produce really good quality products. And we set up a different plan, a different operating strategy. And that was so that we could all come to work, enjoy it every day, get that equipment running at the optimum settings, and keep it running at the optimum settings, whatever that took. And this is where there's a difference. You know, there's two different ways to run a business. One of them is to pump out the volume and just try to get the product out the door. And the other way is to make it right. And that is really to make sure that every product that's coming off that line is what the consumer expects and is the very top quality. And to do that, you have to do things slightly differently. So that was an epiphany for me and for the team around me. And since after we put that process in place, things just picked up beautifully.
Kevin's approach to engaging the experts on his team, no matter where they fit in the business hierarchy, has been the key to his success as a manager and a consultant. As he points out, people want to be proud of their work and valued for their contribution. And when they are, it can be inspiring.
We were working with a group of frontline employees who had never used computers before. And this was only a few years ago, but they never used computers. And we worked with them on a system. We shared our learning on how getting the right information into the hands of the right people could make such a difference, and making sure those frontline employees had the information that they needed to make really good decisions. And we'd been working with this group for about 6 weeks. And then one of the frontline operators went out, bought himself with his own money a smartphone, then brought that into the factory and asked my chief technology officer if he would install a program on his phone so that he could have access to the line results while he was at home, and he would know then what he was going to be facing when he came into work the next day. So that to me showed that not only was he investing his own money and his own time in getting this system in place, he was extremely excited about knowing how he could improve the line results before he came to work. Now, to me, that's real ownership. And that shows that when people do get engaged, everything is possible. Following on from that particular employee over the next year got promoted to the management team. And that was almost unheard of in that organization, that a technician who had been running the production line would be moved into the management group. So things are possible when we start to build that engagement with people.
And when you do this engagement, it does end up benefiting the bottom line of the company, right?
It's phenomenal. So I think that, in a way this is almost obvious, but when people are engaged, then the results are going to be better. When people are allowed to do the things that they want to do, when they're allowed to take the opportunity to do the right thing and to make it right, then the results get immediately better. I'm working with a company recently, and we had been working on what we call $1 million savings. So we look for opportunities in the manufacturing company where we can save at least $1 million. And we had achieved that in the first 9 months. And then the team came back to me and said, Kevin, where's the next $1 million opportunity? And so to have, again, this is the frontline employees asking me how they can then, where we should focus for the next $1 million saving. And to me, again, that's phenomenal, because we're really turning those frontline employees on and allowing them to take control of the business. And when we talk about the business, we're talking about the bottom line of the business.
As a leader, you may think it's motivation that gets employees engaged. But Kevin believes that a leader's role is to actually inspire, and he defines the difference and why it's so important.
Well, if I'm inspired, it's coming from inside me. And that means that, whatever's happening from an outside perspective, I still want to get up in the morning. I still want to do the very best I can. I still want to, get out there and do my part of the work, because it's inside me. It's part of my journey, my direction, as well as the company's direction. Motivation is coming from outside. That's where you need somebody else there to get you to the gym in the morning, or, to make sure that you're doing the things that you ought to be doing. And this is where I see it differently. If the leader is inspirational, if they're inspired on their own journey, then that inspiration shines out of them. And then we have to find what is inspiration, what's the inspiration for each individual in the business to make them also want to, break the barriers to take the business to the next level. And so I see the difference of inspiration and motivation coming from outside, inspiration from shining from within, and helping us during the darker times to really want to overcome the barriers.
So you say you have to figure out what inspires each individual. In a huge company, that's going to be a big job.
Yeah, well, that's actually the responsibility of the individual to find out what inspires them, and then how they apply that to their role in the company. And so what the leaders are doing is showing people that it's possible within this company, that you can have, you can help find your dream and your goal within the company. And as part of that, if we're all on the same, we're on the same boat and we're all leading in the same direction, then you have the maximum opportunity to bring that inspiration into your life as well. So it's not that the leader has to go and find out what the inspiration is for every individual, but the leader has to set the groundwork or the framework for the individuals to be able to find their own inspiration and then to be able to apply that into their job.
Building honest relationships that value the input of others is basically authentic leadership. And the Align process that Kevin has developed is based on this. Basically, he says, be the leader you want to follow.
You get comfortable with yourself. I think if you as a leader have decided on how you're going to lead yourself, and then you reflect that in the business. And I like the idea of a leader being an inspiration to the organization. And you can only be an inspiration if you feel inspired. So you have to find out what it is that inspires you and then bring that to work every day. Nobody wants to work for a boss who feels miserable, feels beaten up, and is coming in not feeling full of energy. So whatever it is that gives you as an individual energy, then you want to make sure that you're doing those right things so that each day you walk into the business, you can inspire other people with your energy.
The whole idea of leadership is based on having people follow you, as they're inspired to do so because they feel valued and supported in their endeavors. One of the areas that leaders may fall short in is the work environment. How often do you walk the factory floor and actually see the work conditions your teams are operating in? Are the washrooms clean? The food good in the restaurant? Are there safety issues on the factory floor? Kevin highlights these things as really important for a leader to pay attention to.
Well, I mention washrooms and restaurants because they're two places that every employee is going to spend some time during the day. And we want to know that our employees are being treated well, that they're being given the right sort of facilities, the right quality of facilities, they're being kept in the right conditions to show our employees that they are important and that the quality culture that we're trying to build within the organization is there for them as well as for our customers. And so restrooms and restaurant for me are important areas. But in terms of walking the factory floor, you have to confirm to yourself that things are working the way you feel you want them to work. The factory is part of your home. And imagine you ask your children, did you tidy your bedroom today? And they're like, yes, Dad, don't worry, I tidied my bedroom. And then you go in and you walk in there and you actually see it. And you get a sense for what tidying the room means for them. And so walking the factory floor is really giving us a sense for what is the standard that I'm setting within my company. And is that acceptable to me? I feel that in our factories, we should have the highest possible standards. What you're willing to walk past becomes your standard, whether you like it or not. So, if you're willing to walk past piles of scrap and, old gearboxes and motors piled up in a corner, that is your standard. And the only way you're going to know what your standards are is actually by, walking around the factory, seeing people, seeing the way things are working, and then deciding whether that's okay for you or not.
In Chapter 7 of the Make It Right book, Kevin discusses the letter N in the align process, which represents nurture feedback and recognition. And when we talked about this chapter, Kevin explained the power of recognition, and he offered this definition.
I split these things from rewards, which is basically salary and benefits that you get within a business, and then recognition, which is being told that you're valuable, that something that you've done has added great value to the business, that you're helping the business, that you're supporting it. That the work that you're doing is valued to me as a leader and to the overall organization. And so that's kind of like my definition of recognition, just people being recognized for what they're doing well. I've never known an employee who has felt like they've had too much recognition. And you rightly say that as we become adults, we don't naturally recognize the positives that people are doing. In some ways, we expect that. And many times in a company, people expect that people work for the rewards. You're getting paid, so just get on and get your job done. And I've found that recognition is so much more powerful than the rewards.
At the end of the day, we all have a boss. And for the leader, it's their job to make sure they deliver strong results to their boss. With strong leadership, you should have everyone on your team focused on doing a good, high-quality job. And from what Kevin has seen in his years as a consultant, the strong results follow.
People think that doing things well costs more money. For example, I often hear that quality, the cost of quality to produce a good quality product, costs you more. And I've found in the industry, it's completely the opposite for that. When you put in the work and the diligence to produce a really good quality product, your costs actually come down because everything else around that behavior of producing things well reduces costs and losses in every other part of the business. So it really does pay to do things right.
That's Kevin Snook, author of Make It Right, 5 Steps to Align Your Manufacturing Business from the Front Line to the Bottom Line. With more than 2 decades of experience as a manufacturing leader and consultant, he's followed these practices to success. The comments he made about setting your people up for success were echoed by the business leaders I've spoken to on the Make It Right podcast throughout the last year, and they're pursuing those approaches and seeing results. If you'd like to hear the podcasts 1 through 8 that are related to the Make It Right book, you can find them on the podcast tab at lucidi4.com. That is also where you can find all of the Make It Right podcasts, and you can also find Kevin's book on Amazon. I'm Janet Eastman. That's our show for this week. You can follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook, and subscribe to the podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, and YouTube. Thanks very much for marking our first anniversary, and thanks very much for listening to the Make It Right podcast.